Introduction. Epaminondas, a man whose name might not roll off the tongue like Alexander the Great or Achilles, was nonetheless one of the most brilliant military minds in ancient history. His innovations not only altered the tactical landscape of warfare, but also changed the balance of power in Greece for generations. Yet for all his brilliance, Epaminondas remains a somewhat forgotten figure, overshadowed by the louder legends of his time. What this man lacked in fame, he made up for in strategy, humility, and the bold leadership that crushed Spartan dominance and reshaped Greek politics. His story is a reminder that even the greatest empires can fall, especially when faced with a mind that dares to defy the odds. A time of transformation. The 4th century BCE was a time of profound transformation for the Greek world. After decades of warfare and political instability, Greece was divided and worn out. At the center of this chaotic landscape was Sparta, victorious after the Peloponnesian War, yet fragile beneath its iron grip on the Greek mainland. For those who still believed in the myth of Spartan invincibility, the years ahead would prove to be a rude awakening, thanks to a small city-state in central Greece, Thebes, and its unlikely champion, Epaminondas. The Peloponnesian War, 431–404 BCE, had left Athens, once the dominant naval power of Greece, utterly defeated. It wasn't just the loss of its empire that crippled Athens, but the internal strife and economic hardships that followed. Sparta, in contrast, emerged from the war as the supreme force in Greece. With its fierce military discipline and a society built around warfare, Sparta seemed destined to rule unchallenged. But as often happens with overconfident regimes, they missed the cracks forming beneath their feet. And no, I'm not talking about an ancient Greek version of potholes. Spartan society was built on a rigid hierarchical system, with a small elite class of warrior citizens at the top and a large enslaved population called the Helots at the bottom. The Helots, who worked the land and supported the Spartan economy, were essential to the city's survival. Yet, the Spartans had to live in constant fear of rebellion, as the Helots greatly outnumbered them. Any weakness in Sparta's control over its subjugated people could, and eventually would, lead to chaos. Meanwhile, Athens, though weakened, still retained its cultural influence. Its philosophers, artists, and democratic ideals remained admired across the Greek world, even if the city itself was no longer the shining beacon of power it once was. Athens played the long game, focusing on diplomacy and rebuilding, but it would take years to regain even a fraction of its former influence. And then there was Thebes, a city that had long existed in the shadows of Athens and Sparta. Nestled in the region of Boeotia, Thebes had a history of internal conflict and often found itself playing second fiddle to larger powers. It was the kid brother of Greek city-states, always around but never quite taken seriously. That, however, would soon change, and it wasn't because they suddenly got taller. As tensions simmered across Greece, Thebes found itself under Spartan control, humiliated and subjugated. Spartan troops were stationed in Thebes, overseeing its political affairs and ENZ. But beneath this occupation, discontent brewed. Many in Thebes longed for the day they could throw off Spartan rule and reclaim their autonomy. What they needed was a leader who could unite them and show them that the so-called invincible Spartans were, in fact, quite vincible. Enter Epaminondas. Who was Epaminondas? Epaminondas might not have been the most well-known figure in ancient history, but he certainly was one of the most intriguing. Born around 418 BCE, Epaminondas came from a relatively humble background in Thebes, a city that had often been overshadowed by its more illustrious neighbors, Athens and Sparta. His rise to prominence wasn't due to noble birth or wealth, but rather his intelligence, moral character, and innovative military genius. He was the kind of guy you'd want to have a philosophical debate with, right before he turned around and completely outmaneuvered you on the battlefield. Historians describe Epaminondas as having received an exceptional education, particularly in philosophy and the arts. He was deeply influenced by Pythagorean thought, a philosophy that emphasized the balance of opposites and the harmony of the universe. If this sounds like a bit of a stretch for military strategy, you're not alone. But in the mind of Epaminondas, these abstract ideas about balance would one day lead to the development of one of the most innovative military formations in history. You see, Pythagoras didn't just give us the Pythagorean theorem, thanks for that, by the way. He also introduced the idea of balance in nature, symmetry, order, and harmony. Epaminondas took these ideas and applied them to warfare, creating battle tactics that were as harmonious as they were devastating. His most famous innovation, the oblique phalanx, was a product of this philosophical mindset. But we'll get to that in a moment. What really set Epaminondas apart, though, wasn't just his brilliance in tactics. It was his humility and moral conviction. Unlike many other generals of his time, who were obsessed with personal glory, looking at you, Alexander, Epaminondas was motivated by a genuine desire to free his city from Spartan oppression and restore balance to the Greek world. He believed in the freedom of all Greek city-states and detested tyranny in all its forms, whether it came from Sparta or elsewhere. That's right. Epaminondas was the ancient Greek version of a guy who would fight for the underdog. His rise to prominence was as unexpected as it was impressive. The turning point in his career came in the early 370s BCE, when Thebes was desperate for a leader who could liberate the city from Spartan control. The occupation of the Theban citadel, Cadmea, had left the city under the thumb of Spartan forces, and the people of Thebes were ready for change. Enter Epaminondas, who wasn't initially a prominent political figure, but quickly became indispensable due to his intelligence and character. In 379 BCE, a group of Theban exiles, tired of being bossed around by Spartans, launched a coup to reclaim the city with the help of Athens. The plan worked, and Thebes was finally free from Spartan control. While Epaminondas didn't lead the coup, he quickly rose to prominence in the aftermath, becoming a key figure in Thebes' political and military efforts. The humiliation of Thebes. Before Epaminondas could rise to challenge Sparta, Thebes had to endure years of humiliation under Spartan rule. This period of occupation was like a bad sequel to a once great story. Thebes, once a powerful city-state in the Boeotian League, had been reduced to a puppet under Spartan dominance. The once proud city was forced to bow to Spartan interests, and its people could only watch as their city was stripped of its autonomy. Let's rewind a bit. The Boeotian League was a confederation of city-states in central Greece, with Thebes at its head. The League had been a significant regional power, but after the Peloponnesian War, everything changed. Sparta, fresh off its victory over Athens, was eager to assert control over as much of Greece as possible. In 382 BCE, Sparta made its move, seizing control of Thebes by orchestrating a coup and installing a pro-Spartan government. This wasn't exactly a friendly takeover. It was more like Sparta showing up uninvited to Thebes' house, taking the best room and declaring, "Oh, by the way, I'm in charge now." To ensure their control, the Spartans stationed a garrison of troops in Thebes' citadel, the Cadmea, effectively holding the city hostage. This was a classic Spartan move, using their military might to keep their thumb firmly on the necks of subjugated city-states. The people of Thebes chafed under this occupation, but any attempt at rebellion was swiftly crushed. For years, Thebes had to swallow its pride and obey the commands of its Spartan overlords, much like a younger sibling forced to follow the rules of a bossy older brother. However, the Spartans underestimated Theban resilience. The longer the occupation lasted, the more resentment simmered beneath the surface. Many Theban patriots, unable to tolerate the occupation any longer, fled the city and Esias, Among these exiles were leaders like Peloponnesian, who, along with Epaminondas, would later spearhead Thebes' liberation. Living under Spartan rule wasn't exactly a walk in the Athenian agora. The pro-Spartan oligarchs who now governed Thebes were deeply unpopular, and most Thebans despised the fact that their city was no longer independent. The Spartan garrison stationed in the Cadmea stood as a constant reminder of Thebes' subjugation, looming over the city like a silent, oppressive shadow. For Theban men of fighting age, the situation was particularly dire. Many were conscripted into serving Spartan interests, forced to fight for the very power that was oppressing them. Meanwhile, the city's political and military institutions were either dismantled or restructured to serve Spartan control. Thebes had become, in essence, a client state, its glory days as a leader of the Boeotian League seemingly behind it. But even under occupation, the spirit of Thebes was not entirely extinguished. Secret networks of Theban exiles worked behind the scenes, plotting their city's liberation. They knew that if they could just find the right moment and the right leader, they could reclaim their city and throw off the Spartan yoke. Spoiler alert, that leader would be Epaminondas. The breakthrough came in 379 BCE, when Theban exiles, with the help of a small group of Athenians, launched a daring operation to take back their city. Disguised as women, because nothing says surprise attack like a toga and a fake beard, the exiles infiltrated Thebes and assassinated key members of the pro-Spartan government. It was a bold move, part assassination, part revolution, and it worked. The people of Thebes, inspired by the success of the exiles, rose up in rebellion, stormed the Cadmea, and expelled the Spartan garrison. For the first time in years, Thebes was free from Spartan control. This was no small victory. It was a turning point for Thebes and a major blow to Spartan authority in the region. The liberation of Thebes didn't just restore the city's independence, it ignited a resurgence of Theban pride and ambition. And while Sparta wasn't about to roll over and let Thebes bask in its newfound freedom, the tide was beginning to turn. With the Spartans out of the city, Thebes had the chance to rebuild and reassert itself as a major power. Epaminondas, though not yet fully in the spotlight, was quietly positioning himself as the leader who would guide Thebes to its greatest victories. But before Thebes could rise to true prominence, it would have to face the full force of Sparta's wrath in what would become one of the most pivotal battles in Greek history. The turning point. In 371 BCE, on a plain called Leuctra, Epaminondas would lead Thebes to a victory that would forever change the balance of power in Greece. For centuries, the Spartans had been regarded as the most formidable military force in the Greek world. Their discipline, training, and sheer reputation made them seem almost invincible. But as the Spartans would soon discover, invincibility is only a myth until someone has the nerve to prove it wrong. And Epaminondas had plenty of nerve. By the time Thebes had reclaimed its independence, tensions between Thebes and Sparta had reached a boiling point. Thebes, with its newfound freedom and a renewed sense of ambition, was ready to assert itself on the Greek stage. Sparta, meanwhile, was eager to crush this rebellious city once and for all, as they had done with so many others. Both cities knew that a direct confrontation was inevitable. In 371 BCE, Sparta, led by King Cleombrotus I, marched into Boeotia with a large army. Confident that they could easily subdue the Thebans, the Spartans expected a quick and decisive victory. After all, they had never lost a pitched battle against a Greek hoplite force. This was classic Spartan arrogance at work, underestimating their opponents while banking on their reputation. Thebes, however, had a secret weapon: Epaminondas and his revolutionary tactics. Epaminondas was no ordinary general. He didn't see war as a mere contest of strength, but as a complex puzzle to be solved. He knew that Thebes, despite its growing military strength, couldn't win against Sparta in a traditionally The Spartan hoplites were simply too disciplined and too experienced. So, rather than trying to out-Spartan the Spartans, Epaminondas decided to rewrite the rules of the game. Enter the oblique phalanx, a tactical formation that was as bold as it was unconventional. In a typical Greek battle, armies lined up in long, straight rows, with the strongest troops in the center. But Epaminondas decided to concentrate his best soldiers on the left flank, where the Spartan king and his elite hoplites would. Instead of meeting the Spartans in the center, Epaminondas' forces would hit them hard on the side, concentrating all their power in one overwhelming blow. It was a classic divide and conquer strategy, but with a twist. Instead of dividing the enemy, Epaminondas would hammer them with everything he had on one side, banking on the idea that if he broke the Spartan right, the rest of their army would collapse in confusion. Now, this wasn't just a tactical innovation. It was a huge gamble. By weakening the center and right of his own line, Epaminondas was essentially betting everything on the left flank's ability to deliver a knockout blow. If the left flank failed, the Theban army would be left wide open to counterattack. But Epaminondas had faith in his men, especially the Sacred Band, an elite unit of 300 highly trained Theban soldiers who would lead the charge. The day of the battle arrived, and the two armies faced each other on the plain of Leuctra. The Spartan army, numbering about 10,000 men, outnumbered the Thebans, who had around 7,000. Yet, the Spartans, led by King Cleombrotus, were supremely confident. After all, they had never lost to a force of Greek hoplites before. Why should today be any different? As the battle commenced, Epaminondas executed his plan to perfection. On the Theban left flank, where he had concentrated his forces, the attack was swift and brutal. The Sacred Band, fighting with unmatched discipline and determination, slammed into the Spartan right flank, where King Cleombrotus and his elite soldiers stood. The Spartan line, unprepared for the concentrated force of the Theban attack, began to buckle. Cleombrotus himself was killed in the fighting, and as news of the king's death spread, panic began to ripple through the Spartan ranks. The Spartan right flank, their strongest position, was crumbling before their eyes. The unthinkable was happening. The Spartans, for the first time in history, were being overwhelmed in a pitched battle. With their right flank shattered, the Spartan army lost its cohesion. What had started as a disciplined formation of hoplites quickly descended into chaos. The Thebans pressed their advantage, driving the Spartans from the field. By the end of the day, the battlefield was littered with the bodies of fallen Spartan warriors, and Thebes stood victorious. The Battle of Leuctra wasn't just a victory. It was a seismic shift in Greek history. For centuries, Sparta had been the dominant military power in Greece, its soldiers feared and respected by all. But Leuctra shattered that myth. The defeat was more than just a military loss. It was a psychological blow from which Sparta would never fully recover. The aura of invincibility that had surrounded the Spartan hoplites for so long was gone, and with it, the foundation of Spartan dominance. For Thebes, the victory at Leuctra marked the beginning of a new era. Under Epaminondas' leadership, Thebes would rise to become the most powerful city-state in Greece, while Sparta would slip into decline. Epaminondas had not only avenged his city's humiliation at the hands of the Spartans, but had also redefined the rules of Greek warfare. Leuctra's legacy would resonate for generations. It proved that even the most dominant powers could fall, given the right combination of innovation, strategy, and courage. And for those who had once believed in the myth of Spartan invincibility, the Battle of Leuctra was a sobering reminder that no empire, no matter how strong, is ever truly invulnerable. A new power in Greece. With the dust of Leuctra still settling and Spartan shields left abandoned on the battlefield, Thebes began its rise as a dominant force in Greece. It was a moment that would have made the gods of Mount Olympus pause in surprise. Who could have predicted that a city long overshadowed by Athens and Sparta would rise to the top. Epaminondas, fresh off his victory at Leuctra, was now tasked with turning Thebes' military triumph into lasting political power. But here's the tricky thing about power in ancient Greece. It's as fleeting as a Spartan's patience in a philosophy class. While Thebes had the momentum, maintaining dominance in a world filled with shifting alliances and long-standing rivalries would prove challenging. Luckily for Thebes, Epaminondas wasn't just a great general. He was also a skilled diplomat and strategist. And spoiler alert, he wasn't about to rest on his laurels or hoplite helmets. The first step in consolidating Theban power was the reformation and strengthening of the Boeotian League, the confederation of city-states that had been weakened during the years of Spartan domination. Before the rise of Thebes, the Boeotian League had been a significant regional force, but the Spartans had systematically dismantled it during their occupation. Now, with Sparta in retreat and the Greek world in flux, Thebes had the chance to revive the League and establish itself as the leader of a new power bloc. Epaminondas wasted no time in rebuilding the League, ensuring that Thebes was once again at its head. But instead of ruling through fear and military coercion, as Sparta had done, Epaminondas sought to unite the cities of Boeotia through a sense of shared purpose. The cities under Theban leadership were given more autonomy, and Thebes fostered an environment where mutual benefit, rather than brute force, was the foundation of their alliance. Of course, a healthy dose of military might didn't hurt either. After all, alliances in ancient Greece were often more, "we're stronger together," than "let's be best friends." Through diplomacy and strategic marriages, because nothing says we're serious about this alliance like sending your cousin to marry the local warlord, Epaminondas managed to secure the loyalty of the cities in Boeotia. The League became the backbone of Theban power, providing both military manpower and resources to strengthen Thebes' position on the Greek stage. While Thebes was consolidating power in Boeotia, Sparta was still reeling from its defeat at Leuctra. The once mighty Spartan military had lost its best soldiers, and with them the aura of invincibility that had kept so many of its allies in line. As word of Sparta's defeat spread, cities that had once feared its retribution began to reconsider their loyalties. In the Peloponnese, where Spartan dominance had long been unchallenged, cracks began to form in the Spartan alliance system. Cities like Mantinea and Elis, once solidly in Sparta's camp, began to drift away, seeing the rise of Thebes as an opportunity to free themselves from Spartan influence. Sparta, weakened and struggling to recover from the loss of its elite warriors, was no longer in a position to enforce its will on these cities. Epaminondas, ever the opportunist, seized on this discontent, forging new alliances and expanding Theban influence into the Peloponnese. One of the most significant blows to Sparta came when Epaminondas helped establish the city of Megalopolis in 371 BCE. Megalopolis, located in the heart of the Peloponnese, was founded as a center of resistance to Spartan power. By encouraging the formation of a new city-state, Epaminondas created a strategic buffer against Spartan influence, ensuring that even as Sparta tried to recover, it would face opposition in its own backyard. Perhaps Epaminondas' most audacious move in undermining Sparta's power came with the foundation of Messene in 369 BCE. For centuries, Sparta had relied on the labor of the Helots, a population of serfs who worked the land and provided the economic foundation for Spartan society. The Helots had long been subjugated by the Spartans, forced to toil under harsh conditions to support the Spartan warrior class. Epaminondas, always thinking several moves ahead, recognized that by liberating the Helots and granting them autonomy, he could strike a devastating blow to Sparta's economy and social structure. And so, in a bold stroke, he established the city of Messene on what had been Spartan-controlled territory, giving the Helots a new home and effectively cutting off a major source of Spartan wealth. This was a strategic masterstroke. By liberating the Helots, Epaminondas not only weakened Sparta's economy, but also created a powerful new ally for Thebes. Messene would serve as a bulwark against any future Spartan resurgence, ensuring that Sparta could never fully regain its dominance in the Peloponnese. It was the ancient Greek equivalent of flipping the Monopoly board and saying, "I win." By the mid-360s BCE, Thebes was at the height of its power. Under Epaminondas' leadership, the city had transformed from a humiliated vassal of Sparta into the most dominant force in Greece. The Boeotian League was revitalized, Theban influence stretched across the Peloponnese, and Sparta had been reduced to a shadow of its former self. But while Thebes had risen to new heights, the Greek world was inherently unstable. Alliances shifted with the wind, and the rival city-states were constantly jockeying for power. Epaminondas had built Thebes into a powerhouse, but even he knew that maintaining dominance in the fractured world of Greek politics was a challenge that required constant vigilance. As Thebes reached its zenith, Epaminondas began to look to the future, knowing that his city's place at the top was far from guaranteed. Still, for a brief moment, Thebes stood as the preeminent power in Greece, a remarkable achievement considering where it had started. Epaminondas had done what no one thought possible. He had crushed Spartan hegemony, liberated entire populations, and reshaped the political landscape of Greece. And while Thebes' dominance would not last forever, its rise under Epaminondas remains one of the most dramatic and improbable success stories in ancient history. The lasting legacy of Epaminondas. Epaminondas' rise from an unassuming philosopher-general to the man who reshaped the Greek world is one of history's most remarkable stories. His tactical brilliance at Leuctra shattered the myth of Spartan invincibility, forever altering the balance of power in ancient Greece. Through his leadership, Thebes was transformed from a city-state under Spartan domination into the most dominant force in Greece, albeit for a brief, shining moment. Yet, what truly sets Epaminondas apart from other military leaders was not just his ability to win battles, but his vision for a more just and balanced Greek world. By liberating the Helots and founding Messene, he fundamentally weakened Sparta's grip on the Peloponnese, proving that even the mightiest of empires could be brought low through strategy and innovation. In many ways, he was a revolutionary leader, not just on the battlefield, but in his approach to governance and freedom. Despite his great successes, Epaminondas remains a somewhat forgotten figure in the broader scope of ancient history. His name doesn't echo through the ages like that of Alexander the Great or Julius Caesar, perhaps because his achievements, though monumental, were relatively short-lived. Thebes' dominance faded after his death, and the city was soon overshadowed by the rise of Macedon under Philip II and Alexander. However, Epaminondas' legacy lives on through the lessons he left behind, that true power lies not only in strength, but in adaptability, creativity, and moral conviction. His innovations in military tactics influenced generations of commanders, including Philip II, who would go on to use some of Epaminondas' techniques to conquer much of Greece. Epaminondas may not have sought fame, but his achievements, especially the victory at Leuctra, secured his place in the annals of military history. His life serves as a reminder that even the most dominant forces can be challenged, and that sometimes the most revolutionary leaders come from the most unexpected places.
When life's challenges come my way, paused and soft, I'll be ready for that day. Very calm, echoing the voice, but still close. Strength and wisdom by my side. Intense, strong, no fear to face, nowhere to hide. Intense. I subscribe to this channel, click like today. Because content like this just lights my way. Intense and slow.